I can hear it, I think. Okay, so I'm Wim. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to actually repeat his talk word for word. No, I'm not. I'm going to try to do it differently, although there will be a little bit of overlap. So, title of this talk is Why You Should Try Flutter. And we have an ulterior motive with that, which is that when we have people try it, people are reluctant to try it because, they don't want to spend the time to learn new technology. But we find when people just try Flutter, like do some little project with it, just spend a day or two with it, that they fall in love with it. So we invite you to fall in love with it. So, whoa. First, I want to talk a little bit about Flutter and React. So this is the part that Sanket was trying to do for me. So the reactive parts of Flutter are very similar to React and React Native, okay? And we think, and I've used reactive systems for a while. Actually, interestingly enough, I used one called Mercury, which I think finally died, but it was actually a really nice one. So I've used a lot of different reactive systems in the past. But Flutter itself was heavily influenced by React, and to a lesser extent React Native, because React Native was just coming out then. And in fact, on our website we say that Flutter was even inspired by React, okay? So we're not trying to bash React at all. We actually think it's kind of cool, which is why we were inspired by them. But technology moves forward. So one of the things I'm going to try to talk about a little bit is what are the differences. And I think I have it turned off, but I have a slide at the end, if we have time, that even says why you shouldn't use Flutter, right? Just like you said. So, but I think you went through most of those things anyway. But beyond the reactive parts of it, Flutter is very different from React Native, right? So that's probably the things you want to know. If you're already using React Native, you want to know what's the benefit of switching over to Flutter, okay? So let's take a look. So if you go to the website, flutter.io, this is the first thing you see. It says, build beautiful native apps in record time. And a lot of people look at that and they go, what are you talking about? So let's break it down. We're going to do this in 4 sections. First one's build beautiful native apps in record time. And I'll go through each one of those. And hopefully I'll be able to skip some of the slides because he already covered that material, but we'll see. So first one is build. So we're building mobile applications, right? Everybody knows that here. But I also want to point out that unlike most other systems, including React Native, it's a complete SDK. It has everything you need to build that app, right? We're using as little as possible from the platform. And so it's not just a framework. We usually don't call it a framework, we call it an SDK, but it's a full SDK. So in that way, it's very similar to game engines like Unity, right? When you're building something with Unity, you're not using native widgets, you're not using any of that stuff, right? So why are we doing that? Well, one of the goals when they started working on Flutter was they realized that the world changes quickly, right? So how long have you been able to write apps for mobile phones? What do you think? How long's it been? It's been actually just over 10 years. So 10 years ago, you couldn't do that, right? So in 10 years, the world changed dramatically. And we expect 10 years from now, the world's going to be completely different as well. And one of the things that we're pretty sure is going to happen is that there's going to be displays everywhere. I'm fully expecting that my shoes will have displays on them, right? I mean, there's already clothing that can display things. But, even, this is just I'm just showing the ones that are currently available. Some of you might recognize this one. That's the new Google Home that's coming out with a screen. It was announced a few weeks ago. We have thermostats. We have all sorts of things. We have smart TVs that have terrible user interfaces, right? That was one of the motivations also. It's like there's all these people that are going to put screens in everywhere. Oh, we also have cars, right? You know, the Tesla actually doesn't have that bad of a user interface, but it could be better, right? So people are going to be building lots of user interfaces for lots of different screens, and Flutter is designed so it can do all those things. That's one of the reasons why it renders all the way down, right? Because we don't want to be dependent on a specific kind of screen. We want to help everybody. But for now, we're focused on mobile apps, right? But I just wanted to point out there's this longer-term vision of what we're trying to do with this. All right, so that's build. Beautiful. What do we mean by beautiful? Well, the way we like to say is no more cookie cutter apps. For a long time, when you built an app, it looked like every other iOS app, or it looked like every other Android app. And that era is over. He showed some images with left-right images of award-winning apps from 2016. On all of those, one of the things that's consistent across all those apps that won awards and were very popular is that they used few or no built-in widgets. They used all custom widgets. So the Flutter developers realized that customized widgets were the future, you know? Like, it's not good enough just to write an app anymore. You have to write an app that stands out. And the way you do that is with custom user interfaces, right? So you want to be brand driven. You want the app to reflect your company, not Apple or Google, right? And we want you to be able to do that. So highly customized, and as he said very well, you want to be able to say yes to your designer. You never want to have to say no, right? And yet, you still need to be able to have the app be usable, right? So there are differences between iOS and Android that are important, and you want it to feel like that. And that doesn't mean you want different design. It just means you want that functionality, that ability to control the app to be the same, right? So that people can use it. And I think of that as like automobiles, right? There are all kinds of automobiles. You have sports cars, you have trucks, you have, you know, you name it. And yet every one of those things, the steering wheel does the same thing, right? You push on the gas pedal to go. It's in the same position on every car. There's a brake pedal next to it. Used to be a clutch pedal, gone. Well, no, you have clutch pedals here, that's right. We don't have them in the US anymore. I don't know why. It's very hard to find one. So the idea is you can get into any car and you'll know how to operate it, more or less, right? But all those cars look completely different. They all have, they have their own style. You know, a Ferrari is always going to look like a Ferrari. It's not going to look like a Volkswagen, right? So that's what we're shooting for. We want to be able to have that user interface that feels familiar so you can use it, but then we want the design to be up to you. And last, but not least, we want these apps to be smooth. You know, a lot of people talk about app speed. What we found is that the speed of the app is actually not the important thing. It's how smooth it is. And if an app is going, you know, really fast and then it hits a garbage collection cycle and it jerks and stuff like that, doesn't matter how fast the app is, it looks terrible, right? And that's what people notice. They get used to speed really fast, you know. It's like, how many people have gotten a new phone and go, wow, this is really fast, and then 2 weeks later you're like, still waiting for it, right? You get really spoiled quickly. So speed is not the answer. That's like, you know, drugs. You get addicted to it, right? But smoothness is the important thing. So, beautiful apps. These are 3 apps that have been released on Flutter in the last few months. The one on the left is, I think, the newest one. It's from Abbey Road. Does anybody not know who Abbey Road is? Okay, Abbey Road is the music studio in London that produced, I think, every Beatles album, and about half the really great albums that ever came out of England. It's a fantastic studio. There's actually, this is a total aside, but Google built a street view tour of the Abbey Road studios, so you can actually walk around inside of it, and they'll actually have bands, you know, standing there, and you can walk around while they're, you know, frozen, not practicing and stuff, and they have videos and stuff. That's a really fun thing. Anyway, they came out with an app that's a recording studio, right? It's a very complex app. uses all sorts of things. They did it in Flutter. The next one is Alibaba. I love this one because you look at this. It doesn't look like an app at all, right? It's actually really beautiful, but it fits their style, right? No native widgets at all. Of course, we don't use any native widgets, but it doesn't look like the native widget. And then this last one, this is something up until about, I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago, we were telling people, don't build games with Flutter, you know, because we're not focusing on that. Well, these guys ignored us, and they built a game engine that runs in Flutter. It's called 2 Dimensions. You can actually download this app, and I recommend you do, because I'm actually only showing you the least interesting game there. They have 3 demos you can see down here. Demo 1, 2, and 3. This one you can play with. The second one is actually even more impressive. It has a real-time animation going on. And one thing, if you do download and look at it, you'll notice something interesting about it. The thing that shows the widget that shows the 3 different demos, it's actually transparent with a real-time animation going on behind it. And as far as we know, nobody else can do that, only Flutter. Right? That's a hard thing to do. And then the third one's actually a game you can play, so that's worth downloading it anyway, and it's free. So anyway, the whole point of this is, look at these 3 apps. Can you actually believe that they were all written by the same framework or the same SDK? They're really different. And that's the important thing. We don't want cookie cutter apps. We want apps that are designed for their purpose. And there's more of them. I'm only showing a few of these. In fact, we don't have a lot of time. I'll probably just mention, you know, but you can see they're all very different, have different styles. The last one is a chat app, yet another chat app, right? But you can only send and receive emojis, right? So it's a chat app for children, and it even has parental controls on it, so you can, you know, control who they're chatting with and stuff like that. Anyway, just a brilliant thing, real easy to do in Flutter. Okay, so that's build beautiful. The third thing is, what are we building? We're building native apps. And he already gave away the punchline of this, but I just want to talk about what does the word native mean, because it's a word that's abused a lot. Most people think that native is the OEM platform. And again, Rowan mentioned that we like to call it OEM because, you know, it's kind of an error to call it native. But we also have the word native used a lot by like React Native and Xamarin Native. So they're talking about the native widgets or the built-in widgets on the platform. But if you actually look up the definition of what native means, even in the computing world, what native actually means is something that's written in the language for the processor that it's running on, right? So this is from the Oxford English Dictionary. So by definition, what Flutter's doing is native. As he said, we are compiling all the way down to ARM code. It's raw, right to the metal ARM code. We're doing the same thing for the GPU. We're emitting stuff for it. There's no virtual machine. So we're actually more native than Android. Like, that's pretty crazy. And we don't use JavaScript, right? Which is like what React Native uses. Actually, every cross-platform tool, other than Xamarin probably, I think, uses JavaScript. Are there any exceptions? I'm just thinking that. I might be wrong. Anyway, so apps are native on each platform. One of the nice things about being native is that you have a lot of control over the execution. So it's not that Flutter is incapable of writing jerky animations, but if you see that, you can go in as the developer and fix it because you have control over it, right? Unlike in JavaScript or something where a garbage collection can happen and you have no control over it, right? So that's a thing. And as I said before, this is like game engines like Unity. You know, Unity compiles down to native code as well. All right, so, and in fact, Flutter is the only reactive SDK that is native, right? So that alone should make it worth your while to try it out. You know? I mean, how many people here like using JavaScript for writing their large apps? Okay, I do too, actually, okay? I'm one of those people. I like JavaScript for some things, but there's other apps that it's just the wrong language, right? And as Sanket and I were talking about, use the right tool for the job. So yeah, if you're building, there's a lot of apps you can build in React Native. Great, build them in React Native. And then there's a lot of apps where you actually want a strongly typed language. You don't want any errors, right? I mean, we all know the difference between, you know, dynamic and static languages, and they have different purposes. Okay. So reactive and Flutter, we have reactive views. Just, you know, they're very similar to the ones in React Native. So if you're coming from React Native, you'll feel very comfortable. We even have some of the same function names like set state and stuff like that, right? But we don't have a JavaScript bridge, which is another thing that causes speed problems in React Native. Another thing is, and I'll talk about this later, we only re-render what has changed. So when we're doing animations, and there's a lot of animation going on in Flutter, we actually only repaint those parts of the screen that have changed. And that speeds things up dramatically. And in fact, that's so fast that we have no support for scrolling. Right? Almost all frameworks, you have special code just for doing scrolling. Right? Because scrolling has to be really fast. I mean, if you're scrolling and you know, you want as your finger moves, you want it to feel like that screen is attached to your finger. And if it's not, you get kind of seasick, right? So that's really important. In Flutter, scrolling is done by layout. Okay? And earlier, I think I had an image of this. Now I can't even remember where it was. This one. Okay. If you look closely at this, watch when it gets back to the main screen on this one. Watch as it scrolls. You notice some things are moving sideways, things are moving all over the place. And it's as fast as scrolling. So you can do any kind of scrolling you want. Now, I don't know why you'd want to do crazy scrolling, but if you do, you can do it in Flutter. You know, the whole point is you can do anything you want. And in this case, it's actually kind of cool looking, right? Anyway, way too many, far back. Okay, so also, Dart has streams built into it. They're not quite as capable as the ones in ReactiveX, but there is a version. There's RX Dart, so you can have full, you know, ReactiveX streams, but you don't need them most of the time. You can just use the built-in streams. So it's designed to be reactive. And of course, the other thing that we get from reactive is we get the stateful hot reload, because that keeps the state of your view separate from the actual code. And that's what allows us to keep hot reload being stateful. All right, so quick, and yet another diagram. Here's React Native. So the way React Native works is you have your app and you have a virtual tree of widgets, right? That's built inside that. And if you have an animation or anything else going on, it keeps track of what's changing. And it updates the platform's OEM widgets, right? So there's this, excuse me. All right, so there's two stages for rendering. You go through this thing where it does a comparison, it updates the native widgets or the OEM widgets, and then those widgets are rendered on the platform, right? And Flutter, as I already gave away, skips that entirely. Now that widget tree is the only tree of widgets. It is the widget tree, and it's rendered directly to the canvas, right? So that's another way that we get a lot of speed and a lot of control also, because anything on this left side is in your app. You can change it. Okay, so he's already gone through this, but I just wanted to point out that, you know, the Dart framework is actually more than that, because not only does it include the framework, the reactive parts, but it includes all the renderers. In fact, it has the gestures in it. You can add new gestures to Flutter. It's actually really easy to do that. I've done it. Okay, and you can add new types of animation. And then it has all the widgets that come with it, right? And then underneath that is the engine. He's already talked about that. I'll skip that. Okay, fourth and last, you can do all this in record time. And I'm going to give you lots of examples of it. And the first example is hot reload. You already saw him doing hot reload. Everybody believes it's fast, right? Great, okay. Going on. But hot reload is only one part of that story. Okay, another area which we think actually has a bigger impact on being able to get apps out is in testing and maintenance, right? So what we're showing here, this crazy guy is looking at a phone. This is a phone running Jelly Bean, right? Jelly Bean came out in 2012, and Material Design, as he mentioned, came out 2 years later. So this phone has no capability of showing a Material Design app. So if you wrote an app and you're using Material Design, it's not going to run on that, or you'll have to use a compatibility library. How many people like compatibility libraries? Not me. No hands. Wow, pretty good. But this app looks the same on this 2012 phone as it looks on the current phones, right? So you know that when you create an app, it's going to look, what it's going to look like on every phone that it will run on. So no longer do you have to like buy 15 phones and test your app out on every version of that operating system. And then you have to do that for 2 platforms, right? You don't have to do that anymore. You're creating one app and it's going to look the same. You know what it's going to look like. And that means that you also don't have to do all that testing on different platforms, right? You only need to test on one platform each. So that helps a lot. You can be assured that things are going to work. So how is this possible? Again, as I said, the Flutter app is rendering directly. It's using its own widgets. It's controlling every pixel on that screen, which means you're controlling every pixel on that screen because you can write the code to change any pixel on the screen, right? And no need for compatibility libraries. New OS releases come out, they don't break your app. So not only are you backward compatible, you're forward compatible. As long as they still allow you to write to the canvas, your app is going to run, and it's going to look good. Now, if you want a new feature, you know, let's say a new phone comes out and has a new feature and you want to take advantage of it, what do you have to do then? Well, you just download the latest version of Flutter, recompile, and you're done, and you're going to take advantage of that, right? Because that's built in. So new features run on older phones, and you can take advantage of new features. And in fact, when you do that, since you have the new version of Flutter, it will have that new feature on every old platform as well. This is really awesome. Right? This makes a huge difference. So an example of this is when the iPhone X came out. And everybody was surprised when it came out because it had this weird notch at the top, right? Flutter actually supported the notch before Apple did. You could actually write an app in Flutter before the phone came out, right? So we were the first platform to support that because it's really easy to add. And you could run it on the simulator and test it and everything and release it and support the notch. Now, that's not a case of backward compatibility because there were no phones backward that needed a notch, right? But at least, you know, your app, if you just recompiled with the latest version of Flutter, would work with the notch. So you don't have to go through and like relay out your app because you have this weird layout now. It just works. Okay, internal results. I'll go through this really quickly because Rowan went through this one as well. So this was an experiment that was done 2 years ago. This is before we went alpha. They have this internal app. They wanted to convert it to iOS, and they were about to hire a bunch of iOS developers because we don't have a lot of iOS developers hanging around inside Google. I have no idea why. And the results were, and so when they decided to do this, they said, okay, we're going to measure this. We want to see whether this is faster or not. And it was faster. It was less code. And the other thing they found was that as they hired new programmers, they could actually bring programmers up to speed on Flutter faster than on Android, okay? And they had faster development cycles. They could add new features quickly, and maintenance was easier because they only had to worry about one, one set of tests, one platform, and the testing didn't have to be done for any change they did, right? So that's just compared to writing one platform app. And then on top of that, as he said, you get iOS for free, right? So, and he also mentioned later on, this is great, so they rewrote an existing Android app into Flutter, and they released that, and they didn't tell anybody that they changed anything, and nobody noticed. It looked just like the Android app. And on iOS, it looked like an iOS app. It had the different scrolling, you have different icons, different fonts, everything. So it was a big success. And this is before we even went alpha. And that's about the time that we realized, oh my God, we're onto something. So Hamilton, you mentioned Hamilton. No, you didn't mention Hamilton. Okay, so let me talk a little about Hamilton. You've probably never heard of Hamilton. It's the most popular musical that's ever been on Broadway. And it's pretty hilarious because it's a musical about the Revolutionary War in America, and it's done in hip hop. Okay, so it's a wild and crazy play, but it's been wildly successful. I've never seen it because, the tickets are all scalped for about $8,000 each. And I don't have that kind of money. But they decided, it was so popular, tickets were actually sold out a year ahead of time on it, that they wanted to create an app. And one of the things they wanted to do on the app was to have a lottery. You enter the lottery, and it's not really a lottery because you don't pay for this, you just enter it. And every day they pick somebody and they give them a $10 ticket. So they can then go see the show for $10. Right? And that's because, they were trying to be revolutionary. They wanted everybody to be able to see it. And, at $8,000, a lot of people couldn't go see it. So they wanted to have an app, and they wanted to have a bunch of other things. So these people found out about Flutter at Google I/O in 2017. And they went back, and in 3 months, they wrote an app which was featured on both iOS and Android. So, and it's very popular. And it's a fairly complex app. In addition to the lottery, which you have a couple of screens here of that, there's a camera for doing selfies, and you can put yourself on the dollar bill, or you can put King George's crown on your head, or put a ball gown on and dress up and stuff like that. So it's kind of cute. They also have a store for selling merchandise. They have interviews. They have all sorts of stuff. And so the bigger thing, though, is that this app has remained popular. And the reason it remains so popular, that's not me beeping, is it? Is that they continuously add new features to it. So they have 500,000 monthly active users for one play, right? That's pretty phenomenal. And those people come back all the time because they know there's going to be new content. Right. So let's go to another example. This is a company actually in Portland, where I live, called AppTree. You've never heard of them. You never will hear about them other than here. But they have a lot of big name customers. McDonald's. They actually have about a dozen universities that I know of. One of them is Stanford, Fermilab, other places like this. So they're building enterprise apps for these customers. So for example, at universities, if they build apps that help you, okay, if the heating fails in one of your buildings, where's the valve to turn it off and work on it, right? Things like that. So this is the app I was talking about. They're heavily dependent on maps, but they also need them to work offline. So their whole app works with or without internet connectivity, and they're large apps, okay? So they ran into a problem in 2017. They actually were so successful, they had so many clients, that they were a year behind adding new features. Because not only did they have an OEM Android app and an OEM iOS app. They had a web app also. So any new feature they added, they had to add to all three platforms, and they had to look alike. And they're a small company, right? So they were in trouble. They could not add features. They were falling more behind. And they found out about Flutter, actually in August of 2017. And they decided to do a trial. They said, okay, for 6 weeks, we're going to try to rewrite our app in Flutter. And after 3 weeks, they had they had a minimal MVP, a minimum viable product running. So in half the time they allocated for it. And so at that point, they threw away both of their OEM apps and rewrote the whole thing in Flutter. And they have an article, and I strongly recommend you read this if you're interested. It says, the article's title is Why We Chose Flutter and How It Changed Our Company for the Better. Right? It changed their company completely. They can now add features much more quickly. They say that they have a 3x productivity gain. Right? And at the end of the article, the last line is, mobile development is fun again. And this is something that we hear from people all over the time, and I want to point out how important this is. One of the things that's really nice about Flutter is that it removes a lot of the drudgery. You know, what's the fun part about mobile development? Adding a new feature. What's not fun? Replicating it on multiple platforms. Testing it on even more platforms. Fixing bugs. Having 2 separate teams that implement the same feature, but it's different enough that it confuses people when they switch between the web and iOS or whatever, right? Those are the not fun parts. They don't have to worry about that stuff anymore, right? So it's fun again. So Geeky Ants. I had to put in a quote from Geeky Ants. Actually, I've been using this for a while. I didn't put it in for this one. But they're fans as well. And Alibaba. This one's made a huge difference to us, which really surprised us. Alibaba came out with an app that uses Flutter. And this is actually just a couple of weeks old, these quotes. They sent us a bunch of quotes. So we got quotes from about I think almost a dozen different engineers and managers inside their company. And they said that it significantly reduces the amount of time to add a new feature. It used to take them a month to add a new feature. Now they can do it in 2 weeks. All right, so a little bit better than 2x for adding new features. So an incredible efficiency boost. And they have more. There's like 2 pages full of these quotes, and I only picked out a few of them. They talk about Flutter running in native mode, and it's very flexible, so they can do things that it was hard to do before. It's very smooth, especially on older devices, you know, because we're doing the rendering ourselves and we're not depending on that device. And they also mentioned that it reduces the time to test. So, I'm wrapping up a little bit, although I haven't done the live coding yet. Why try Flutter? You can write things faster. It's high velocity development. It's a very expressive and flexible toolkit, and it produces native apps. Okay, those are the reasons to try it. So let's see a demo. So what I'm going to do is, he did a really good job of showing you hot reload, so I'm not going to do so much of that one, but I am going to do part of my demo, and that is he took the existing web widgets that come with Flutter, and he built something really fast. I'm going to build a new widget. All right? So let's see if I can do this. So the way widgets work in Flutter is that they use composition. We don't use inheritance for defining, you know, chains of widgets. And so a floating action button, nice simple widget, it's actually quite complex. It has the little ink splash, you know, when you click on it, it does a little animation and stuff like that. We can build our own. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to duplicate a floating action button. Build it from scratch. And so a floating action button then uses 3 child widgets. So the top level one is material. So a material widget defines how it looks. And then underneath that is a container, and that's what controls how big it is and other aspects of it. padding and stuff. And then the inkwell is what does the ink splash and controls the interaction. So let's do it. All right, so you know, you've already seen that sort of stuff. Yeah, let's just, actually, let me fix one thing that I always hate. So, you know, it has this thing where it shows you push the button this many times. Let's just get rid of that. So I'm going to delete that widget. And then I'm going to just put it into here and call it count. All right. I can save it, and that's what it looks like now. Now, one of the things you might notice is before this was a column, right? Because it had two texts in it. We want to get rid of the column. Let's go back to that outline that he sort of. So if I click on the column, so that column's right there. So when you highlight something in the text view or in the code view, it gets highlighted here. And then I can just say, okay, get rid of it. It's gone. Okay, so really simple. So this is sort of the poor man's graphical view. It's showing the widget hierarchy. You can manipulate it really easily. Okay? And we can do a save, and there'll be no changes. We just got rid of something we didn't need anymore. So let's, yeah, let me add a few more floating action buttons. Okay, so down at the bottom we have a floating action button. And let's go ahead and put a column in there, because now we want to have multiple floating action buttons, right? So we can do that from the outline view as well. We have the floating action button, we say put it into a column. All right, so now we have a column. See that code? Yeah. And I can save it again. And what happened? You know what happened? We have a column, and the columns always start all the way at the top. So our floating action button actually is way up in the upper right corner. So let's fix that. Let's make that be a main axis alignment is okay, back where it belongs. Okay. So that's all the work to do that. Now let's add some more floating action buttons. So I'll grab one of the one floating action button and save it. And now we have two floating action buttons. Okay, I haven't built a new widget yet. I'll get to that in a minute. But let's make this a little bit better. Let's put in some spacing. So size box. I'll say I'm not nearly as fast a typer as Rowan is. Okay, so I'll put that there just so it's spaced apart. So I kind of cheated here. The way I put spacing around it is I just put a little blank box in between them. You could have also put padding around them. Right? That would work as well. But this is nicer. So in this case. So we have two floating action buttons, and they look and do exactly the same thing. So let's fix it. Let's change the icon to remove. You can see it now it's a minus. And let's add some color. So that one's now green. And let's change the other. Oh, let's just cut and paste, make it life easier. Okay, so now they're different colors. All right, so now I'm going to get to the fun part. We're using built-in floating action buttons here, just like he did. But just below it, I've already typed in a definition of a new floating action button. This one's called myFab. Right, so I can go through the code here. This is just the signature of the constructor. We have 3 local variables, and then we have a build function. Build function is the interesting part. And as I said before, you have a material widget, which has a child, which is an inkwell. which has a child that's a container. All right? So this is there. So I can just go up here and I can change one of these. Oops. I can say this is a my fab. Let's save it. And nothing changed, right? It looks exactly the same. And you may not believe that we've actually changed it, but we have. So those two different fabs are being drawn by completely different code, one that I just wrote, right? And it still looks the same. So, but if you're going to build your own floating action button, you probably want to change something about it, right? So let's do that. Let's go back down here and say, you know what? My designer came to me and he said, you know, you have those floating action buttons and they're all circular and I hate them. I want square floating action buttons, right? That would be hard to do if you're using a native widget because you can't change the native widgets. Or excuse me, I keep saying native. I'm such a bad boy. So let's put in a button material and save it. Now we have that. Now, how many people noticed the animation? Anybody notice that? Okay, a couple people in the front row. Let's do that again. So we'll go back to being a circle. Watch that top floating action button. When it changes from a square to a circle, it doesn't just change, it animates between them. Did you see it? Okay, and then we can change it back to be a button. And then I'm just going to do it one last time. Ready? There. Okay, no, the reason I'm showing this off is that there's all this animation inside Flutter that comes for free, right? The container widget, if you change its shape, it actually animates between them for you. And animations are really important in mobile apps because they help direct your eye to what's going on, right? And this is something you get for free. This is one of the reasons, I mean, this is just a simple animation of one object, but let's say you have an object that's coming on screen or something like that. That animation will look really nice and you can control it if you don't like the default, right? Like we could even change, you know, how fast that animation happens. That'd be kind of silly to do on something as small as this, but you control that animation a lot and you can have things animate in and out really nicely. And if you're trying to use a static layout tool, it's kind of hard to control that animation. So right now we're focused on making the code be as easy to build, you know, to use as possible so that you can control the animation, the layout, everything all at once. Okay, so, and, you know, you show this to the developer and they say, well, that's nice, but I actually want rounded corners. So we can say border radius is, oops. One, and we'll say 10, I guess. Okay, so now we have rounded corners. And that animated too, but you didn't see it because it's so small. Right? So let's go back up here. And so we have one fab and one floating action button. You know, you can see they're different. We can just change the other one as well. So we can say my fab, save that, and now they're both easy. And it animated as well. All right, so we just changed that. And then the developer comes back and they say, you know, column looks kind of weird and it's taking up some of my real estate. So can we do this as a row? And you say, what else would you like me to do? Right? And there's a lot of things like that. Like in CSS, if you want to center something, there's like 8 different ways to center something, and you have to know the right one for each thing, right? In Flutter, there's one thing. It's called center, right? There's one right there. Oops, right there. And it will center whatever the child is. Doesn't matter what it is. So you say center, and it centers. Don't have to worry about that. That's because the way Flutter does layout is very different, and I don't have really time to talk about that. Anyway, we can do more stuff. We can add another button. Actually, let me do that as one last thing. So we'll create one more floating action button. You know, I just realized that I didn't do something. Did anybody realize what I missed doing? What? Exactly. So the counter before was being incremented, and I want to change that to be decrement. And as soon as I do, oops, I already added that other one. We'll fix that later, but let me just show you these now. They actually still work. You can count up, you can count down, all that stuff. But we're going to change this one to be a reset. So, and let's change it to be, let's change this one to be orange. So we have like a traffic light or something. Okay, so now we have 3 of them up for using the wrong icon. Instead of remove, let's make it replay. So there. And our designer is happy. Right? So that's how you can build stuff like it. And if they might look at this and they go, you know, that red is a little bit too light. Can you make it a darker color of red? And you can go, sure. So there. Another thing I suggest you look at is the new material design, which has theming. They came out with a whole bunch of tools that are really nice, and Flutter is actually the only SDK, and that I'm including Android, iOS, and web. We're the only one that fully implements material design, and we fully implemented it before they released it. Okay. So instead of actually dragging behind the OEM platforms, we're often ahead of them. Okay. For the notch, for material design, whatever. And the new material design is really, really nice. You can actually create very strange things. I mean, you can do stuff like, oh God, here, let me just do one quickly. So instead of having a circular border radius, we can say only, and then we have to say we're going to do something in the top left. Well, if I wasn't destroying my thing, let's move over a little bit. I think that's right. No. What I do, closing paren. It's even telling me that. Okay, so that's actually too small. Let me make it really obnoxious. So this is like you have a new age designer comes in. We want really weird looking buttons. I've actually seen things like this in use, so don't laugh too much. Anyway, you can just, what I'm trying to show to you is not only can you do anything you want, it's really easy to do anything you want. We built a brand new widget. It's a fab. Fab is rather complex, and yet we're able to do it because it builds on top of other widgets. We can go in and change those other widgets as well if we want to. We can replace them. We can do anything we want. It's pretty fast, and the hot reload means you can look at it and, you know, say, nah, that's not really what I wanted. You don't spend like 2 weeks implementing a button that looks like this and just have the designer go, nah. Right? Anyway, so back here, you know, this is what I was showing, that the container, so these 3 things are just widgets. One nice thing about the container is, you know, in CSS you have margin and you have padding, and they're different. They're the same thing, and we just have one padding widget, and it can either be inside the widget or outside the widget, and it just works. So you only have to have one widget for doing padding. There's the code. There's the change to get the rounded corners. And if you want more info, I think he had a good slide, but you can see this one also, and I'm hawking my own articles as well. So thank you. So anybody have any questions?
I have one thing that I want to ask. That code, right? Alan, like N. Is it possible to do for each children Alan? For example, you int update all the like down, right?
Uh-huh.
Is it possible to do one at the top and one at the bottom?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. You can. There's built-in ones, so you can say center. You can say beginning, end. Actually, I think it's start. You know, I never remember the actual ones because the code completion just tells me what it is. But you can also like say spread so that they're spread evenly, or you can have it where the first one's at the top, the second one's right in the middle, and the third one's at the bottom. There's all sorts of built-in things. But if those aren't what you want, don't use that. Instead, just position them yourself, right? You can position in terms of percentages and stuff like that. So pretty much anything you want to be able to do, you can do with it. Right? And right. And if it doesn't do something that you want it to do, which I'm not sure if that is true, you could write your own one, right? Or you can go in and you can modify the existing one. I mean, one of the nice things about this, if I go back to this one, if you've done, well, I don't have a floating action button anymore, but I don't know. If you want to see what the material widget does, you can just do that. And I've just opened up the source code for the material widget, and you can look at it and say, oh, that's what it does. And you can modify it if you want. I'm not sure if I recommend that because you're you're basically forking Flutter. But what you would more likely do is you just copy it, give it a different name like my material, and change it any way you want. Right? So you can modify any of these things. It's just they're all there. Right? How much time do we have for questions? I don't want to drag on.
I think we have like 5 more minutes max.
Okay.
We have like one last talk after this.
So, and I promise you, after we're all done, I'm not going anywhere for a few minutes. So if you want to ask me questions.
I think we have one last question. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, that's really easy to do. You have full access to all the information about the platform you're running on. So you can, you can just say platform.ios equals true, do one thing and do something else on every other platform. You can also even tell which version of the operating system it's on. You can tell how big the screen is. You can find out almost anything you want, because more common than wanting to do something like that is like, okay, this screen, this phone has a bigger screen, so you figure that out and you want to do the layout slightly different for that. Yeah, you can do all that. That's all manual stuff, right? But if you've done your layout properly, where you've used things like the one that spreads things out across an area, you can actually make the layout so that they automatically adapt to it, right? Uh-huh. Anywhere you want. You can do it at the top level and have 2 different things, or you can actually just have a different widget on them, or it's code. You can do anything you want. There's not any way you have to do it. You could sit there and just say, okay, if I'm on iOS, use the built-in floating action button, and if I'm on Android, use myfab, and have them be completely different. But I also want to just say, don't do that, right? We don't want to make apps that are different on different platforms, because then when somebody picks up their wife's phone and tries to use the same app, it's surprising to them, right? All those award-winning apps that he showed, and I can show even more of them, they look pretty much the same on both iOS and Android. And those are the apps that are popular and win awards. So why would you want to do something different, right? Okay, you can do it. I'm just telling you, yes, if you have a crazy client, and I'm sure all of us do, right? Then, you can do stuff like that. I didn't really show the Hamilton app very much, but did you notice that they didn't use any of the built-in icons? Like, they didn't use the normal menu icon. They changed all this stuff because they didn't want it to look like anything. They wanted it to be wild and crazy, right? So they were able to change everything about it. Now, they wanted them to be the same on both platforms, but you can easily do that, and you can test for any characteristic of it and just say, yeah, if it's on this, do that, okay? The other thing you can do, we have an app called the Flutter Gallery, which I recommend that you download and install. And if you pull out the drawer, you can let's say you're running it on an Android phone. You can open the drawer, and one of the options is what platform it thinks it's running on. So you can tell it, okay, you're actually an iOS phone, even though you think you're an Android phone, right? And it does the scrolling the other way. The scrolling thing is a hilarious story, actually. When they first were doing Flutter, they wanted to get the feel of scrolling just right, because that's really important. And the scrolling on iOS has a very specific behavior, and it's very different than the scrolling on Android. And people, they don't really notice it. I mean, they don't realize it. But if it's wrong, then they really notice it. It's bad. So they actually got a phone. They drew a grid on it. And they got a really high-speed camera, super high-speed camera. And they did the scrolling, and they filmed it. And then they took all the coordinates of, like, okay, over time, how fast does it accelerate, how fast does it, all this stuff. They put all those data points, and they fed them into Wolfram Alpha. And they got out this really simple polynomial, right? And, most of the time when people do scrolling, they do this big physical simulation, right? That is modeling acceleration and deceleration and the mass of the screen and all this stuff. Anyway, they ended up actually with a faster implementation of iOS scrolling than iOS had. And then they went ahead and did the same thing for Android, because they decided, oh, we shouldn't use the physical simulation for Android, we can do a really fast one. And that's how, scrolling came about. So when you're doing those things, we wanted it to look exactly right. We were surprised that we actually got a better implementation. So I think that's it for questions.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, so you can take these questions offline, no problem.
Yeah,
all right?
I'll be happy to hang out as long as you want. And I also just want to point out, I brought this and I gave it to Sankit.
Yeah, thanks
It's
a lot.
my last one, because I filled my suitcase with these things.
Thank you so much.
But
all right, thanks a lot for flying all the way from Portland.
my pleasure.